After enduring 5 long years, I finally completed the final payment for my bakery. The celebratory champagne was still bubbling when the bell above the door chimed softly. There stood my brother Tyler, accompanied by our parents, holding a folder filled with legal documents. "We're family, Clara. Family shares success," he proclaimed as he slid the papers across my counter. A partnership agreement for a 50% ownership transfer. My parents nodded in approval, with my mother insisting this belongs to the family. Though my hands trembled, my voice remained steady as I uttered the words that brought my brother to tears. Growing up, I had watched my parents dote on Tyler. While I pleaded for school supplies and saved my babysitting earnings for clothes, they gifted him a car for his 16th birthday. When I sought assistance with my college applications, my mother informed me they were setting aside funds for Tyler's business school tuition. That was the dynamic of our family. Tyler received, while I learned the hard way to fend for myself. Our home in Springfield, though not large, always felt stifling. My father worked diligently as a bank manager, while my mother taught elementary school. They weren't affluent, yet they always managed to find extra for Tyler. When he crashed his car just 3 months after receiving it, they replaced it without a second thought. Conversely, when I needed $30 for a field trip, I had to earn it by walking the neighbor's dogs. Baking became my refuge at the age of 12. It was during a summer visit that my grandmother Agnes taught me how to create her renowned apple pie. The precision of measuring ingredients, the science of temperature and timing, it all provided me with a sense of control when everything else felt chaotic. Each triumph in the kitchen bolstered my confidence, which my family consistently undermined. Tyler dropped out of college twice, and both times my parents covered his debts without hesitation. When Tyler decided to venture into real estate, my parents co-signed a loan for his initial investment property. It remained vacant for 8 long months before he ultimately sold it at a loss. In stark contrast, when I graduated high school with honors, my own celebration consisted of a pizza dinner, one that my father grumbled about, claiming it was too expensive. On my 18th birthday, I packed every possession I owned into my old, rusty Civic. All I had to my name was $237, a box of cherished recipe cards from my grandmother, who had passed away the previous year, and an unwavering determination to never rely on anyone again. My mother appeared almost relieved to see me leave, while my father awkwardly handed me a $20 and patted my shoulder. Tyler didn't even bother to come home for the occasion. The first few months were incredibly tough. I rented a room in a house shared with 4 other struggling students. During the day, I worked as a waitress at a diner where the manager deducted $1 from my pay for every customer complaint, regardless of whether it was my fault. In the evenings, I cleaned offices, and on weekends I took on catering jobs for a company that paid in cash and worked us tirelessly. I applied to the culinary program at the community college, taking out loans that no 18-year-old should ever have to consider. My focus was on pastry arts, and I flourished despite the exhaustion. While my classmates groaned about early morning classes, I was already awake at 4:30, preparing breakfast at the diner before heading to school. Professional kitchens were often unwelcoming to women. My first pastry job after completing the program was at Bellini's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. The executive chef, Dominic, would stand uncomfortably close, breathing down my neck as I worked. "Pastry is delicate, like women," he would say, his fingers brushing against mine as he adjusted my piping technique. I persevered because I needed the experience. The sous chef, Alan, was even worse. He would hide my tools, tamper with my oven temperatures when I wasn't watching, and claimed credit for my dessert specials to the owner. When I confronted him, he merely laughed, saying, "Nobody's going to believe a little girl over me. I've been here for 8 years." Everything shifted when Elaine joined as the new general manager. She caught Alan sabotaging my chocolate soufflés just before a VIP dinner and fired him on the spot. Later that night, after the service had ended, she sat with me in the empty restaurant. "You have real talent, Clara," she said, swirling her wine thoughtfully. But talent alone isn't enough in this business. You need your own place, where no one can take credit for your work or hold you back. I laughed softly, replying, I can barely make rent. Opening a bakery requires capital I don't have. So you save, she said simply, every penny, every day, and you plan. For the next 4 years, I lived like a monk. I worked under Chef Marcus, who paid me less than I deserved, but taught me invaluable lessons about running a kitchen efficiently. I took on extra work on weekends at weddings and private events. I moved to a more affordable apartment in a sketchy neighborhood and sold my car, relying on the bus for transportation. Every spare dollar I earned went into my bakery fund. By the time I turned 24, I had managed to save $48,000. It wasn't quite enough, but when I spotted a lease sign on a dilapidated storefront on Maple Street, something clicked within me. The neighborhood wasn't trendy, mostly pawn shops and discount stores, but the rent was manageable, and the space had previously housed a sandwich shop, so the basic infrastructure was already in place. I approached 6 banks with my business plan. 6 loan officers, all men, took turns explaining patiently why my concept was doomed to fail. The location is problematic, one stated. Another questioned my management capabilities at such a young age. One even suggested I find a male business partner with more experience to front the operation. The 7th place I approached was a local credit union. The loan officer, Diane, actually took the time to read my business plan. She asked challenging questions about my projections, my marketing strategy, and my contingency plans. After 2 meetings and a site visit, she approved a loan at a staggering 14% interest. Highway robbery, but it was my only option. The next 3 months became a blur of permits, inspections, and renovations. I tackled as much as I could on my own, painting walls until 3 in the morning, installing shelves, and refurbishing display cases I had purchased secondhand. For tasks beyond my skill set, I bartered. I designed a wedding cake for the electrician's daughter in exchange for rewiring the kitchen to code. I provided 6 months of pastries to the plumber's office in return for his work on the ancient pipes. Opening day turned into a disaster of epic proportions. The main oven began fluctuating in temperature, resulting in one batch of croissants being burned while the next came out undercooked. My flour supplier mistakenly delivered all-purpose flour instead of bread flour. To make matters worse, a freak thunderstorm flooded the street, deterring all but the most determined customers. That day, I sold exactly $84 worth of baked goods against $1,000 in overhead. I locked the door at closing time, sank onto my kitchen floor, and cried for exactly 6 minutes. Then I stood up, recalibrated the oven, called the flour supplier, and began prepping for the next day. Slowly, I cultivated a small but loyal customer base. Early morning commuters began stopping by for coffee and my signature morning buns. A few nearby businesses began ordering cookie platters for their meetings, and the neighborhood mail carrier started bringing in her friends. After 2 months, I was finally breaking even, barely covering my costs and loan payments. That's when my landlord, Jerry, arrived with news that would present the first real test of my business. I'm raising the rent, he announced, not even bothering to take a seat, starting next month. That's not possible, I replied, showing him our lease agreement. He smiled condescendingly. There's a clause about market adjustments. This neighborhood is gentrifying, thanks to businesses like yours. The market has changed. I glanced around at the empty storefronts flanking my bakery. Gentrifying? I'm the only new business on this block. And you've made it so nice, he continued, running his finger along my counter. People are noticing. I've had other interested parties inquire about the space. Unless you want competition right next door, you'll agree to the new terms. He slid a paper across the counter, indicating that my rent would double, effective in 30 days. My heart sank as I realized this could sink my barely afloat business before it even had a chance to thrive. I couldn't afford a lawyer, but I also couldn't bear the thought of the rent increase. I spent 3 nights researching tenant rights and discovered that the Springfield Small Business Association offered a legal aid program. Their volunteer attorney, Janet, reviewed my lease and found that Jerry's market adjustment clause was actually limited to a maximum 10% annual increase, not the 100% he was demanding. Janet drafted a letter citing the relevant lease sections and state tenant protection laws. Jerry backed down, though he made it clear he wasn't pleased. "Don't expect any favors from me," he warned as he departed, leaving me with his revised increase notice, now just 9.5%, but still an additional $300 I hadn't budgeted for. To manage the increase, I took out a second mortgage on my tiny studio apartment. The stress of the payments kept me awake at night. Yet, during those sleepless hours, I created a new recipe that would ultimately help save my business: my sunrise swirl pastry. This delightful treat was part croissant, part cinnamon roll, infused with vibrant orange zest and finished with a pink grapefruit glaze that hardened into a delicate shell. The first weekend I introduced them, they sold out within just 2 hours. By the following month, customers were lining up before opening, specifically asking for these pastries. A local food blogger featured them, and suddenly people were driving across town just to get a taste. Just as business began to flourish, the city announced a major infrastructure project. They would be replacing the water and sewer lines along my entire block, with construction expected to last 3 to 4 months. The day the barriers went up, blocking the sidewalk and parking spots in front of my store, my sales plummeted by 80%. Panic set in as I watched customers approach the construction, look confused, and then turn away. By noon, I had made exactly 2 sales. I couldn't survive 4 months of this. That night, I spread my financial statements across the kitchen table, calculating how long I could remain open with minimal income. The answer was alarming: less than 6 weeks. The next morning, I woke with an idea. If customers couldn't come to my bakery, perhaps my bakery could go to them. I designed a construction special flyer offering free delivery to businesses within a 1-mile radius for orders over $25. I spent my afternoon walking to every office building, salon, shop, and restaurant in the area, introducing myself and distributing flyers. The response exceeded my expectations. By the end of the week, I had secured standing orders from 8 businesses. The accounting firm on 7th Street requested breakfast pastries for their Monday meetings, while the salon, just 3 blocks away, wanted cookies for their clients every afternoon. I began arriving at 4 in the morning to bake, dedicating 2 hours to deliveries before returning to manage the walk-in business that trickled in despite the construction. I was exhausted but managing to survive, until the health department showed up. The inspector pointed to the water stains on my ceiling, remnants of the ancient plumbing in the apartment above my shop. "This is a violation," he explained. "You can't operate with potential contamination from above." I called Jerry immediately. "This is a building issue," I insisted. "You need to fix the plumbing upstairs." "That's not in my budget this quarter," he replied coldly. "You'll need to handle it or face being shut down." The repairs would cost $4,300, a sum I absolutely did not have. I maxed out my last credit card and hired the plumber, who shook his head sympathetically as he worked. "Your landlord's a piece of work," he muttered. "These pipes should have been replaced years ago." The day after I reopened following the health department's approval, I noticed a new sign being installed 2 blocks away. "Sweet Dreams Bakery," read the bright blue awning. A familiar figure stood directing the installation: Alan, the sous chef who had sabotaged my work at Bellini's. I tried to convince myself it was merely coincidence, but within a week, it became painfully clear that it was not. His menu showcased items that were suspiciously similar to mine, including a morning twist that was a poor imitation of my beloved sunrise swirl. His prices were strategically set just below mine, and he had somehow managed to obtain the email addresses of several of my regular customers, enticing them with opening specials. Through industry gossip, I later learned that Alan had been tracking my progress and nursing a grudge ever since Elaine had fired him. He had been waiting for me to demonstrate that a bakery could thrive in this neighborhood before launching his competing business. The following month marked my lowest point yet. With construction still obstructing easy access to my shop and Alan actively poaching my customers, my sales plummeted. I cut my staff hours down to just myself, working an exhausting 20 hours a day. I even slept on a cot in my office to save time on commuting. My meals consisted solely of damaged pastries that couldn't be sold. One particularly disheartening Tuesday, I made a mere $67 all day. After closing, I found myself sitting on my kitchen floor, crying for much longer than just 6 minutes. I was on the brink of calling my loan officer to discuss bankruptcy options when my phone chimed with a notification. A customer had tagged my bakery in a social media post, trekked through construction hell for these sunrise swirls at Clara's bakery, and would do it again tomorrow. Worth every effort. #Desert Island Pastry. #support small business. The post had already been shared dozens of times. Suddenly, something clicked in my exhausted mind. I had been trying to overcome my obstacles, construction and competition, but what if I embraced them instead? What if I turned them into part of my story? The next morning, I took photos of myself delivering pastries while maneuvering through the construction site, clad in rain boots and a hard hat borrowed from a friendly worker. I shared stories of my struggle to keep the bakery alive despite the myriad challenges. To encourage purchases, I created a construction survivor punch card. After 10 purchases, customers would receive a complimentary sunrise swirl and a branded hard hat cookie. People responded to the authenticity of my journey. My social media following grew, and with it, my delivery orders began to surge. Several local food blogs picked up the inspiring story of the determined baker fighting through adversity. One particularly influential blogger, Madison, wrote a piece titled "The Little Bakery That Could," shining a light not only on my pastries but also on the perseverance that fueled them. In a world dominated by corporate food chains, she stated, "Clara's Bakery reminds us what it means to build something real, one pastry at a time." Business was finally stabilizing. The construction was in its final phase, and my new marketing approach was proving effective. Meanwhile, Alan's bakery, which had opened with much fanfare but offered inferior products, was already experiencing a decline in traffic. I had just managed to pay my loan on time for the 3rd consecutive month and was allowing myself to breathe a little easier. Then came the water main break. It occurred at 2 in the morning. The aging infrastructure the city had been working to replace finally gave way completely, unleashing thousands of gallons of water rushing down the street. My bakery, situated in a slight depression in the road, bore the brunt of the deluge. The emergency alert woke me in my apartment, and when I arrived, I found water pouring through my front door. By dawn, the city had repaired the break, but the damage was catastrophic. My custom display cases, my carefully saved-for espresso machine, my industrial mixers, all destroyed. The floor would require complete replacement, and the walls had absorbed water up to 3 feet. The total damage amounted to a staggering $43,000. I filed an insurance claim immediately, only to receive a denial letter just 5 days later. The policy excluded acts of God, and apparently a water main break was categorized as divine intervention rather than municipal neglect. When I called the insurance company, the adjuster was sympathetic but resolute. "You could try suing the city, but honestly, they'll claim immunity and you'll just waste money on legal fees." Standing in my devastated bakery, surrounded by the remnants of 5 years of sacrifice and 18-hour days, I felt something inside me shatter. I had no more fight left. No more credit to max out, no more loans to take, no more corners of my life to cut back on. I was finished. That night, I spent in the bakery's back office, the only dry part of the building. I couldn't afford a hotel, and somehow returning to my apartment felt like admitting defeat. I lay on a makeshift bed of baking mats, scrolling through photos of what my bakery had been just 24 hours earlier. Around midnight, my phone lit up with a message from Madison, the food blogger. Just heard about what happened. This is beyond awful. What can the community do to help? I started to type nothing. It's over. But I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the screen. 5 years of fighting for this dream, and I was about to surrender it with a text message? My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. Clara, baking is just like life. Sometimes the oven runs hot. Sometimes your ingredients aren't perfect, but you adjust and adapt. You never throw out the whole batch. I need to rebuild. I typed instead, but I don't have the resources. Madison's response was swift. Let me make some calls. By noon the following day, she had organized a community fundraiser. Local restaurants offered to host bake sales featuring recipes I provided. 3 competing cafes generously donated their day's profits. A crowdfunding page went live with a goal of $15,000, far from enough to cover everything, but sufficient to initiate repairs. The Springfield community responded with unexpected generosity. Regular customers shared heartfelt stories of birthday cakes I had made, breakfast pastries that had brightened their difficult days, and the time I had stayed open late to provide emergency cupcakes for a forgotten school event. The daughter of the plumber I had bartered with organized a benefit concert in the park. Within 2 weeks, the campaign raised an impressive $22,000. While it wasn't the full $43,000 I needed, it was enough to begin the rebuilding process. I took out another high-interest loan to cover the remainder, adding to my already substantial debt. But now I had something I hadn't possessed before, proof that what I had built mattered to people beyond myself. Unable to afford renting another place during renovations, I permanently moved into my back office, setting up a small hot plate and shower in the utility closet. For 3 months, I lived amidst construction dust and the constant noise of repairs. Every penny I earned went into replacing equipment and rebuilding better than before. During this forced pause in operations, I experimented with new recipes. Inspired by the flood, I developed a deep blue sea cake. Blue velvet layers adorned with waves of ombre buttercream and sugar glass water that sparkled under the light. I posted progress photos online, building anticipation for the reopening. The renovation took twice as long as estimated and cost 30% more than budgeted. There were nights when I lay awake calculating how many pastries I would need to sell each day for how many years to recoup these investments. The numbers were daunting, yet I had come too far to stop now. Reopening day arrived 6 months after the flood, and the line of customers stretched around the block. Madison covered the event for her blog, and 3 local news stations sent reporters. The mayor cut a ceremonial ribbon, saying something about the resilience of Springfield's small business community. The deep blue sea cake sold out within the first hour. By closing time, every shelf was bare, and my credit card machine had processed over $4,000 in sales, more than any previous day by a factor of 4. I should have been ecstatic, but I was too exhausted to feel anything but a numb relief. The momentum continued in the following weeks. A prominent food critic happened to visit while in town for another assignment. His review, published in a national food magazine, declared my sunrise swirls worth a detour, and my deep blue sea cake an architectural and gastronomical achievement that larger establishments would envy. Suddenly, my one-woman operation couldn't keep up with the skyrocketing demand. I was sleeping only 3 hours a night, baking from midnight to noon, serving customers until closing, and then starting prep for the next day. Something had to give, and if I didn't make changes, it would be my health. Hiring help was a terrifying prospect. My margins were still thin despite the increased sales, and taking on the responsibility for someone else's livelihood felt overwhelming. But there was no alternative. I posted a simple help wanted sign and was surprised to receive 32 applications within just 2 days. My first hire was Jamie, a culinary student with vibrant purple hair and multiple tattoos who reminded me of myself 6 years earlier. Training someone to uphold my standards while granting them enough autonomy to be effective proved to be one of the hardest challenges I had faced yet. Having worked alone for so long, articulating my methods required me to develop an entirely new language. The first week with Jamie was rough. I hovered too much, criticized too quickly, and nearly lost her when I redid a batch of tarts she had prepared because the fruit arrangement wasn't exactly how I would have done it. We had a candid conversation where she helped me realize that I needed to trust others if I wanted to grow. With Jamie handling the morning baking, I could finally focus on special orders and developing new products. I then hired a second assistant, Tomas, for counter service. Suddenly, I had a staff, people who depended on me for their livelihoods. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the relief of not having to do everything alone. As business continued to grow, I began eyeing the vacant storefront adjacent to my bakery. It had been empty for years, a former dry cleaner that had closed long before I arrived. Expanding would allow me to add seating, extend my menu to include lunch options, and create a dedicated space for special order consultations. The financial risk was significant. My existing loans were still far from paid off, and taking on additional debt could jeopardize everything if my growth projections proved too optimistic. I spent weeks refining my business plan, calculating break-even scenarios, and researching additional funding options. In the end, I approached Diane at the credit union again. She remembered me, and her first words were, "I read about you in Madison's blog." "You've exceeded every projection in your original business plan, despite the catastrophic setbacks," she said. Diane approved the expansion loan at a much more reasonable 8% interest. Jerry, seeing the bakery's success, was suddenly eager to negotiate favorable terms for the adjacent space. Construction commenced on a doorway connecting the two storefronts, and I designed an expanded kitchen that would facilitate greater production volume. While my retail business was flourishing, I also began developing wholesale accounts with local cafes. 3 coffee shops now featured my pastries, and a high-end grocery store approached me about providing specialty cakes for their bakery section. These accounts created a reliable base income that helped smooth out the unpredictable nature of walk-in business. The Springfield Business Association nominated me for their Best New Business Award, new being a relative term since I was now in my 6th year of operation. This nomination brought additional publicity and earned me a feature in the local newspaper. The reporter seemed particularly intrigued by my journey from being frugal to becoming a business owner, though I corrected her misconception that I had ever been homeless. I had simply lived a very frugal lifestyle and occasionally worked from my office. The publicity caught the attention of Lily Anderson, a minor local celebrity who hosted a morning radio show. She ordered her wedding cake from my bakery, a 6-tier creation that I spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting. When she posted photos to her 2 million social media followers, my online following tripled overnight, and I began receiving special order requests from surrounding states. For the first time since opening, I felt like I was building something sustainable. I still worked 12-hour days, but no longer 20. I had moved back into my apartment and reduced my original loan principal by almost 40%. The existential panic that had been my constant companion for years began to recede. It was during this fragile calm that my family suddenly re-entered my life. On a Tuesday afternoon, amidst a rare lull in customer traffic, the bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see 3 figures I barely recognized. My mother's hair was now completely gray, my father had lost weight and gained wrinkles, and my brother Tyler looked much the same, handsome in that conventional way that had always opened doors for him, now adorned with designer clothes and an expensive watch. "Clara!" my mother exclaimed, arms outstretched as if we had seen each other just last week instead of 7 long years. "Your father and I were just telling Tyler we needed to come see this bakery we've been hearing about." I froze, piping bag in hand, utterly unprepared for this collision of my past and present. Jaime shot me a concerned look from behind the counter, sensing my tension. "What are you doing here?" I finally managed to ask. "Can't family visit?" Tyler replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We've been seeing your name everywhere lately. Thought it was time for a reunion." And just like that, my carefully constructed new life began to crack around the edges. The reunion was awkward at best. My parents acted as if our estrangement had been a mere scheduling conflict, rather than 7 years of complete silence. They wandered around my bakery, examining everything with curious eyes, while making comments that danced between compliments and subtle criticism. "Such interesting decor choices," my mother remarked, running her finger along the reclaimed wood shelving I had installed myself. Tyler seemed particularly interested in the kitchen, peering through the swinging doors and asking pointed questions about my equipment. "These mixers must have cost a fortune," he remarked. "Business must be good." When a customer entered inquiring about wedding cake consultations, my father interjected before I could respond. "My daughter is quite the entrepreneur," he said proudly, as if he had played any role in my success. I scheduled a dinner with them for that weekend, partly to get them out of my bakery, and partly because, despite everything, a small part of me still craved their approval. We met at a mid-range restaurant, nice enough to feel special, yet not so lavish that it would strain my budget. "So tell us everything," my mother said, after ordering an appetizer that cost more than I typically spent on dinner for myself. I shared the abbreviated version of my journey, omitting the nights I had cried myself to sleep, the moments I had to choose between buying food and paying my electric bill, and the relentless struggle against a system that seemed designed to crush small business owners. Even the sanitized version should have inspired some recognition of what I had accomplished without their assistance. Instead, Tyler raised his glass in a toast. "To Clara's lucky break. Always knew you had a knack for baking." "Lucky break?" I echoed. "Well, yes," my mother interjected smoothly. "Finding that location, getting those food bloggers to notice you. Some people struggle for years without such good fortune." My father nodded sagely. "Location is everything in retail. You certainly fell into a good situation there." I wanted to tell them about the 6 banks that had rejected me, about repairing the ancient plumbing with my last credit card, about living in my office for months after the flood. Instead, I forced a tight smile and shifted the subject. "How have you all been?" The conversation moved to their lives. My father had retired from the bank, my mother was still teaching but was contemplating retirement, and Tyler? Well, Tyler had gone through a series of opportunities that somehow never seemed to materialize into actual success. "I've been consulting," he explained vaguely, "helping businesses identify growth strategies." As the evening progressed, I found myself monitoring their expressions, still instinctively seeking the approval I had never truly received. When my father mentioned he was proud of what I had built, I felt a pathetic swell of satisfaction, even though I knew it was unearned on his part. They insisted on a tour of my apartment after dinner, commenting on how cozy it was, code for small, and asking surprisingly detailed questions about my finances. Did I own or rent? What were property values in this neighborhood? Was I saving for retirement? Each question felt like an intrusion, yet I answered politely, revealing more than I intended in my desire to prove my success in their eyes. I had expected the dinner to be a one-time reconnection, but just 3 days later, Tyler showed up at the bakery during our busiest morning rush. "Just thought I'd stop by and see how things run during peak hours," he announced, stepping behind the counter as if he belonged there. Customers stared as I gently directed him back to the customer side, explaining health department regulations regarding unauthorized personnel in food preparation areas. The following day, he returned with a notebook, settling at a corner table for 4 hours, observing our operations and taking notes. When I inquired about what he was doing, he smiled broadly, just interested in the family business. "It's not a family business, Tyler," I corrected him. "It's my business." He waved dismissively. "You know what I mean. We're family. This is a business. Same thing," Tyler insisted. My parents began visiting regularly as well, always during our busiest times. My mother would introduce herself to my staff as Clara's mom, immediately diving into personal questions about their backgrounds and career aspirations. Meanwhile, my father developed a habit of pointing out minor issues to customers, a smudge on a window, a slightly uneven table, always prefacing his remarks with, "My daughter does her best." A week after their initial visit, they invited themselves to my supplier meeting with a new organic flower vendor. They arrived early and were already deep in conversation with him when I walked in. "We're so proud of what Clara's building. The family has always been supportive of her dreams." I swallowed my objections and proceeded with the meeting, conscious of the need to present a united front to the supplier. Afterward, Tyler bombarded me with questions about my margins, supplier contracts, and pricing strategies. Each answer seemed to satisfy him in a way that made me increasingly uneasy. "You've built a solid foundation here," he remarked, studying my daily sales records, which he'd found on my office desk. "With the right strategic vision, this could really expand." The frequency of their visits increased over the following weeks. Tyler began bringing business associates to the bakery, introducing them to our baker, and discussing future plans in vague terms that implied his involvement. My parents even invited my key employees to dinner without consulting me, returning them with stories about my childhood and subtle suggestions that my staff keep an open mind about upcoming changes. Jamie approached me after one such dinner, concern evident in her expression. "Clara, your brother told me he'd be taking a more active role in management soon. Is that true?" I assured her firmly. "This is my business. I built it alone, and I'm not looking for partners." Yet the seed of doubt had been sown, not just with Jaime, but with all my staff. I noticed them watching Tyler during his visits, wondering if he would soon be their boss. My suppliers began directing questions to him during meetings, despite my attempts to correct them. Even some regular customers started greeting him by name, inquiring about his involvement. The stress began to take a toll on my work. For the first time since opening, I burned a batch of morning pastries, my mind distracted by thoughts of my family's increasing presence. I found myself checking the door every time the bell chimed, tensing up whenever I saw them enter. My creativity suffered as well. I hadn't developed a new recipe in weeks. One afternoon, I stepped into the alley behind the bakery to take a brief respite from the tension inside. Through the partially opened back door, I heard Tyler's voice. He was on his phone, oblivious to my presence. "No, trust me, it's a gold mine. She has no idea how to scale this properly. Once I secure my position, we can talk about those expansion opportunities we discussed. Yes, I'm working on getting in before she realizes what hit her. The family angle is working perfectly. She's so desperate for approval, she's sharing everything." My blood ran cold as I grasped the full extent of his intentions. This wasn't about family reconnection at all. This was about Tyler finding his next opportunity, and that opportunity was my bakery. I confronted Tyler immediately, my hands trembling with a mix of anger and betrayal. "I heard you," I said, stepping back into the bakery. "I heard everything you just said on the phone." His face registered shock for only a fleeting moment before it transformed into a practiced smile. "What are you talking about?" he replied, feigning innocence. "The gold mine, securing your position, using the family angle to extract information from me?" Tyler laughed, shaking his head as if I had just uttered something absurd. "Clara, you're under so much stress running this place alone. You're imagining things." Before I could respond, my parents walked in. Perfect timing. "What's happening here?" my mother asked, glancing between us. "Tyler thinks I'm trying to steal her bakery or something equally insane," Tyler said, his tone making me sound paranoid. I was on the phone with a friend discussing a completely different business opportunity. My father frowned. "Clara, you've always had this tendency to imagine the worst in people, especially family. It's why you ran away all those years ago." "I didn't run away," I retorted through gritted teeth. "I left because you made it clear I wasn't a priority." "See," my mother sighed, turning to Tyler. "She's still so distrustful after all we've done." The gaslighting was so blatant, it took my breath away. I had clear evidence of Tyler's intentions, yet somehow I was being painted as the unreasonable one. This had been their dynamic my entire life. Tyler could do no wrong, and my concerns were always dismissed as overreactions. I asked them to leave, and to my surprise, they complied without argument. But the next day, they returned with a new approach. "Family needs to stick together," my mother began, placing a homemade casserole on my counter, the same tuna noodle dish I had detested as a child. "We've been thinking about how hard you're working, Clara. It's not healthy. You need support," my father chimed in. "That's what family provides." Tyler nodded solemnly. "I know we've had our differences, but at the end of the day, blood is thicker than water. We should be working together, not against each other." Their synchronized performance would have been impressive if it weren't so transparent. They were laying the groundwork for what would come next, the pitch for Tyler's involvement in my business under the guise of family loyalty. It arrived sooner than I anticipated. The following week, Tyler showed up with a man he introduced as Nate, a business colleague with expertise in family-owned operations. Nate handed me a business card identifying him as a family business consultant. However, a quick internet search during his bathroom break revealed that his specialty lay in assisting family members in gaining ownership stakes in successful businesses. "Specialty business needs clear succession planning," Nate explained, spreading brochures across my office desk. "Without proper structure, these enterprises often falter during transitions." "This isn't a family business," I reiterated for what felt like the 100th time, "and there's no transition happening." Tyler cleared his throat. "Actually, Clara, I've been thinking about leaving my consulting practice to focus full-time on helping you grow the bakery. With my business background and your baking skills, we could really expand." The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just about Tyler wanting a piece of my success. He needed it. His vague consulting business was likely another failed venture, and he saw my bakery as his salvation. I declined his offer firmly yet politely, expressing my desire to maintain sole ownership. The meeting concluded with tight smiles and hollow promises to continue the conversation, despite my clear refusal. The following day, I received an unsettling call from one of my suppliers. "I'm a bit confused," he said. "I got a call from someone claiming to be your family's business representative, inquiring about our contract terms and whether we could accommodate larger orders for franchise operations." Similar calls soon followed from my landlord, my insurance agent, and 2 of my wholesale accounts. Tyler was systematically reaching out to everyone connected to my business, presenting himself as an authorized representative and gathering information I had never given him access to. The intrusion became even more blatant when Tyler approached Jaime again, this time with a proposition. "When the management structure changes," he told her, "I'll be looking for a head baker. Clara will be focusing more on the business side. The position would come with a substantial raise." Jaime, to her credit, reported this to me immediately. "I don't want a promotion that undermines you," she said fiercely. "Whatever game your family is playing, I'm not interested." Her loyalty should have been comforting, but it only heightened my anxiety about what Tyler might be telling my other employees or business contacts. The bakery had turned into a battlefield, with my family deployed as undercover agents seeking to undermine my authority from within. The stress began to manifest physically. I developed insomnia, often lying awake, replaying confrontations with my family and imagining worse ones to come. I lost 8 pounds in 2 weeks, my clothes hanging loosely on my frame. Panic attacks became a regular occurrence, striking without warning during quiet moments in the kitchen. One particularly challenging morning, after a sleepless night, I received a call from my bank. "Miss Thompson, we're calling to clarify some conflicting information. We received paperwork regarding a change in your business structure, but there seem to be discrepancies." My heart raced as the representative explained that someone had submitted documents suggesting a transition to a family partnership model. The bank had flagged it because the signatures didn't match their records. "I never submitted any such paperwork," I replied, my voice trembling. "There are no changes to my business structure." After securing my accounts with additional verification requirements, I confronted my family during their next visit. Tyler feigned ignorance about the bank paperwork, expressing theatrical shock that someone would attempt such fraud. My parents suggested it might be a competitor trying to stir up trouble, perhaps Alan from Sweet Dreams Bakery. The gaslighting continued as my parents launched a new line of attack, now focusing on community perception. "People are beginning to talk," my mother said during an unannounced visit, "about how you've abandoned your struggling family despite your success." "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "You're the ones who showed up here after 7 years of silence, only when my business started gaining recognition." "That's not how people will see it," my father replied smoothly. "They'll see a daughter who turned her back on family in need. Is that the reputation you want for your bakery?" The threat was unmistakable. Comply with their demands, or they would tarnish my standing in the community I had worked so hard to build. It was manipulative and cruel, targeting the relationships I valued most. Tyler's next move would prove to be even more direct. During a routine health inspection, the inspector casually mentioned that a concerned citizen had reported possible code violations in my kitchen. Although the inspection found nothing amiss, the implication was unmistakable when Tyler later remarked, "It's tough when regulations change so often. It's hard for a small business to keep up." I spent the following week in a state of hypervigilance, meticulously checking and rechecking every aspect of my operation for potential vulnerabilities my family might exploit. I installed security cameras, changed all my passwords, and instructed my staff not to share any information with family members. Just when I thought the situation couldn't become more stressful, I received a notification from my point-of-sale system about unusual access attempts. Someone had tried to log into my accounts multiple times. The IP address traced back to a coffee shop where Tyler frequently worked. I was in the midst of changing all my digital security when my family arrived for what would turn out to be their final ambush. The date was significant, exactly 5 years and 1 day since I had signed the lease on my bakery. It was the day after I had made the final payment on my original loan. The bell chimed as they entered in unison, Tyler in front, my parents flanking him like supporting actors in his production. Tyler carried a manila folder, while my mother clutched her purse with white knuckles, and my father wore the same stern expression he had when disciplining me as a child. "Clara," Tyler began without preamble, "we need to talk about the future of this bakery." I closed early that day, flipping the sign to closed and asking my 2 employees to take the rest of the afternoon off. Whatever was about to unfold, I didn't want an audience. We gathered in my small conference room, which was really just a corner of the expanded space with a table that typically hosted cake consultations. Tyler placed the folder in the center of the table with the theatrical flourish of a magician revealing a trick. "We've prepared some documents that will formalize our family's involvement in the bakery," he announced. "A partnership agreement that grants me 50% ownership, with Mom and Dad serving as an advisory board." I stared at him, perplexed, wondering if this was some elaborate joke. "Why would I sign over half my business to you?" My mother reached across the table to pat my hand gently. "Clara, honey, family businesses belong to the whole family. That's how it works." "This isn't a family business," I reiterated for what felt like the 1,000th time. "I built this alone. You weren't there when I was juggling 3 jobs to save startup capital. You weren't there when I spent hours painting these walls at 3 in the morning. You weren't there when the flood destroyed everything I had built." "That's not entirely true," my father interjected. "We've always been there in spirit. We're your foundation, Clara." The absurdity of this statement might have made me laugh if the situation weren't so dire. Tyler pushed the folder toward me, opening it to reveal legal documents drawn up with far more detail than I would have expected. This wasn't an impulsive proposal. They had been planning this for weeks, possibly months. "I've developed a business strategy for regional expansion," Tyler explained. "With my business school background and connections, we could open 3 more locations within 18 months. But I need skin in the game to fully commit." "Business school background," I repeated incredulously. "You dropped out twice." He waved dismissively. "I completed the essential courses." "The degree is just a formality," I muttered as I flipped through the documents, noting with growing alarm the extensive control Tyler would wield under this arrangement. He would manage all financial aspects, while I would be relegated to overseeing production, essentially becoming a baker in my own bakery. "This is insulting," I said, closing the folder firmly. Tyler's friendly demeanor hardened slightly. "Clara, be reasonable. This neighborhood is becoming much more upscale thanks to your efforts. Commercial rent will skyrocket when your lease renews. Do you have the capital to sustain that?" It was a valid question, one that had kept me awake many nights. My lease would come up for renewal in 8 months, and I was already saving for the inevitable increase. But I wasn't about to admit this vulnerability to Tyler. "I'll manage, as I always have." My mother sighed dramatically. "The community has embraced you as one of Springfield's success stories. How do you think they'd react if they knew you abandoned your struggling family? Your brother has had such a difficult time finding his path." "Are you threatening me with public opinion?" I asked incredulously. "Not threatening," my father corrected, "just pointing out potential consequences. People value family loyalty." The implied blackmail was as transparent as it was despicable. They would paint me as the villain, the selfish daughter who refused to help her family, despite her success. In a community-oriented town like Springfield, such a narrative could severely damage the relationships I had worked years to build. Tyler leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "You know, health department regulations are getting stricter every year. It would be a shame if someone noticed how you sometimes use the back room for storage without the proper ventilation upgrades." I froze. It was a minor violation I had been meaning to address, but the immediate threat was unmistakable. "Are you threatening to report me to the health department if I don't sign?" "Of course not," he smiled, his tone deceptively pleasant. "I'm just concerned about compliance. As a partner, I could help ensure everything is up to code." The conversation continued in this vein for nearly 2 hours, veiled threats alternating with appeals to family loyalty, guilt over their supposed struggles, and reminders of how they had supported me. Each time I refused, they adjusted their approach, finding new pressure points to target. Eventually, Tyler said, his patience visibly wearing thin, "I gave you the idea for this bakery years ago. Remember that conversation at Christmas when I said you should sell your cookies commercially?" I stared at him in disbelief. I had left home at 18. There had been no such conversation. This was an outright fabrication. Yet he delivered it with such confidence that for a moment I almost questioned my own memory. "That never happened, Tyler." "Mom and Dad both remember it," he insisted, his voice rising slightly. My parents nodded in synchronized agreement. "I've been part of this from the beginning. Clara, I'm just asking for formal recognition of that fact." I stood up, my decision made. "I think we're done here. I won't be signing anything." Tyler's expression darkened. "You always were stubborn. We're trying to help you, but you're too proud to see it." "This meeting is over," I said, moving toward the door. "You'll regret this," my father warned as they gathered their belongings. "Family is forever, Clara. You can't escape that." I watched them leave, a curious sense of calm replacing the anxiety that had plagued me for weeks. They had finally revealed their true intentions, stripped of all pretense. Now I understood exactly what I was dealing with. The next morning, I called Angela Rivers, an attorney I had consulted during the flood insurance dispute. I explained the situation, detailing the veiled threats and manipulation tactics that had been employed. "This is unfortunately common with family businesses, Angela," I said, feeling the weight of the situation. "Though in your case, it's particularly egregious since they had no part in building the company." "What can I do?" I asked, my voice tinged with urgency. "Document everything," she advised firmly. "Every conversation, every visit, every unusual circumstance that might be connected to their efforts, and secure your business legally." Over the next week, I followed her advice meticulously. I installed additional security cameras, backed up all my business records off-site, and alerted my staff to report any contact from my family immediately. I changed the locks on the bakery doors and added password protection to my computer systems. I was preparing for battle, but I didn't expect my family to escalate quite so quickly. 8 days after rejecting their partnership proposal, I received notice of a legal action filed against my bakery. Tyler was claiming he had a verbal partnership agreement with me dating back to the bakery's inception. He alleged that he had provided essential conceptual and strategic input during the planning stages and had been promised a formal stake once the business became profitable. It was completely fabricated, yet crafted just plausibly enough that a court would need to investigate. The immediate consequence was a temporary freeze on my business accounts pending initial judicial review. Without access to my accounts, I couldn't pay suppliers, process payroll, or cover ongoing expenses. It was a calculated move designed to create maximum pressure in minimum time. Tyler likely hoped I would capitulate rather than engage in a prolonged legal battle that I might not be able to afford. Angela reassured me that his case was weak, but warned that legal proceedings could drag on for months. "He's betting you'll settle to end the financial strain quickly," she explained. "Then he's miscalculated," I replied, a cold determination replacing my earlier anxiety. I hadn't survived everything else just to hand my bakery over now. With Angela's guidance, I filed a countersuit for harassment and defamation. While we prepared our legal response, I had to find a way to keep the bakery operating with frozen accounts. My staff rallied around me in ways I never could have anticipated. Jaime offered her personal savings to cover supply costs, her generosity overwhelming. Tomas agreed to work for IS rather than immediate payment, showing his unwavering support. My flour supplier, upon hearing about the situation, extended unusual credit terms, allowing me to keep my inventory stocked. Madison organized another community fundraiser, this time specifically aimed at supporting legal expenses, demonstrating the strength of our bonds. Through it all, I remained eerily calm. The constant stress of the past months had burned away all my uncertainty, leaving only resolute determination. This was my bakery. I had built it from nothing. No one, not even family, had the right to take it from me. While gathering documentation for our case, I stumbled upon something unexpected. In reviewing old communications with suppliers, I found an email from an account I didn't recognize, yet it was signed with my name. The message requested changes to delivery schedules and included a scanned signature that, while similar to mine, showed subtle differences. Further investigation revealed several such communications, all sent during periods when my family had been visiting regularly. Among my mother's many talents was an uncanny ability to mimic handwriting, a skill she had utilized during my childhood to sign permission slips and report cards without attracting scrutiny. As I delved deeper, I uncovered evidence that Tyler had approached my primary competitor, Alan, at Sweet Dreams Bakery with an offer to sell him my recipes and customer list after gaining control of my business. The betrayal ran even deeper than I had ever imagined. Tyler didn't want to run a bakery. He aimed to strip mine it for parts and move on to his next opportunity. Angela added these findings to our growing case file. "We need to present all this evidence directly to your family," she advised. "Sometimes seeing the weight of evidence against them convinces people to withdraw before formal proceedings." We scheduled a meeting at Angela's office. I spent the night before reviewing everything we had, compiling a comprehensive history of my solo journey in building the bakery, gathering testimonials from everyone who had supported me along the way, and collecting evidence of my family's manipulation and fraudulent attempts, as well as documentation of Tyler's true intentions. As I organized these materials, I felt something shift within me. The little girl, desperately seeking parental approval, had finally grown. Among my mother's many talents was an uncanny ability to mimic handwriting, a skill she had utilized during my childhood to sign permission slips and report cards without attracting scrutiny. As I delved deeper, I uncovered evidence that Tyler had approached my primary competitor, Alan, at Sweet Dreams Bakery with an offer to sell him my recipes and customer list after gaining control of my business. The betrayal ran even deeper than I had ever imagined. Tyler didn't want to run a bakery. He aimed to strip mine it for parts and move on to his next opportunity. Angela added these findings to our growing case file. "We need to present all this evidence directly to your family," she advised. Sometimes seeing the weight of evidence against them convinces people to withdraw before formal proceedings. We scheduled a meeting at Angela's office. I spent the night before reviewing everything we had, compiling a comprehensive history of my solo journey in building the bakery, gathering testimonials from everyone who had supported me along the way, and collecting evidence of my family's manipulation and fraudulent attempts, as well as documentation of Tyler's true intentions. As I organized these materials, I felt something shift within me. The little girl, desperately seeking parental approval, had finally grown up. I no longer needed their validation. I had built something valuable entirely without them, and their current interest was rooted in exploitation, not love. The next morning, my family arrived at Angela's office with their own lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Jeffrey Barnes. They seemed surprised by my calm demeanor, perhaps expecting the emotional, easily manipulated daughter they remembered. Before we begin formal discussions, Angela said, "Clara would like to address the room." I stood facing the people who shared my blood but had never truly been my family. "For 5 years, I built my bakery without any help or even acknowledgement from any of you," I began, my voice steady. "I worked 18-hour days. I lived in my office when I couldn't afford rent. I survived floods, competitors, construction, and countless other challenges that would have destroyed most businesses." I placed photographs on the table, images of the original dilapidated storefront, me painting the walls alone at midnight, the flood-damaged kitchen, and the gradual rebuilding. At no point during those 5 years did any of you call, visit, or express interest in my life. You reappeared exactly 1 day after I made the final payment on my initial business loan. Your timing wasn't coincidental. Tyler started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I have documentation proving multiple instances of fraud, including forged signatures, unauthorized communications with my suppliers, and attempts to access my business accounts without permission. I have recordings of Tyler threatening regulatory action if I didn't comply with his demands, and I have evidence of his plan to sell my recipes and customer information to my primary competitor after gaining control of my business. I laid out each piece of evidence methodically. For 5 years, I built my bakery without any help or even acknowledgement from any of you, I began, my voice steady. I worked 18-hour days. I lived in my office when I couldn't afford rent. I survived floods, competitors, construction, and countless other challenges that would have destroyed most businesses. I placed photographs on the table, images of the original dilapidated storefront, me painting the walls alone at midnight, the flood-damaged kitchen, and the gradual rebuilding. At no point during those 5 years did any of you call, visit, or express interest in my life. You reappeared exactly 1 day after I made the final payment on my initial business loan. Your timing wasn't coincidental. Tyler started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I have documentation proving multiple instances of fraud, including forged signatures, unauthorized communications with my suppliers, and attempts to access my business accounts without permission. I have recordings of Tyler threatening regulatory action if I didn't comply with his demands. And I have evidence of his plan to sell my recipes and customer information to my primary competitor after gaining control of my business. I laid out each piece of evidence methodically. My mother's face paled as I presented the forged signatures. My father grew increasingly uncomfortable as the recording of his veiled threats played. Tyler maintained his confident expression, but I noticed a slight twitch in his jaw, a childhood tell that always emerged when he was cornered. Here's what happens next, I continued. You will withdraw all claims against me and my bakery immediately. You will sign legally binding agreements never to attempt contact with me, my employees, or any entity connected to my business again. In return, I won't pursue criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and blackmail. Jeffrey Barnes began a blustering response about family misunderstandings and good faith negotiations, but Angela silenced him with a single raised eyebrow. My client has been exceedingly generous in her offer, she stated firmly. The evidence here would not only support the dismissal of your client's claims, but could also lead to potential criminal prosecution. I suggest you review these materials carefully before responding. We left them to examine the evidence, waiting in an adjacent conference room. 30 minutes later, Jeffrey requested to speak with Angela alone. When she returned, a faint smile played on her lips. They'll sign the agreements, she reported. The claim will be withdrawn by tomorrow morning, and your account should be unfrozen within 48 hours. As we re-entered the conference room, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Jeffrey was already packing his briefcase. My father sat, staring at his hands, while my mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, always the victim, even now. Tyler was the only one who met my gaze, his expression a blend of anger and something that might have been respect. "You've changed," he said. "No," I corrected him. "I grew up. There's a difference." As they prepared to leave, Tyler paused in the doorway. "For what it's worth, you built something impressive. I underestimated you." The words I had once longed to hear from my family now held little significance. "Yes," I agreed, "you did." As he turned to go, I saw something I never expected, tears in Tyler's eyes. Not from remorse or love, but from the realization of what he had lost. Not just a bakery he could exploit, but a sister who had become stronger than anyone had anticipated. The family I had been born into walked out of my life that day. I never saw them again. 3 days later, the court formally dismissed my family's claim with prejudice, meaning they could never refile the same action. The judge ordered them to pay my legal fees, a small victory, yet one that felt significant. My accounts were unfrozen and business operations returned to normal, or rather, a new normal, because nothing was quite the same after everything that had transpired. The lingering need for family approval that had unconsciously influenced many of my decisions was now gone. In its place was a clear-eyed confidence I had never fully possessed before. With the threat removed, I implemented permanent security measures to safeguard what I had built. I restructured my business legally, creating an ironclad operating agreement that clarified ownership and succession planning. I upgraded security systems, improved record-keeping protocols, and established clear boundaries with everyone in my professional life. Strangely, the entire ordeal had raised my bakery's profile in the community. Word had spread about my family's attempted takeover, transforming into a David versus Goliath narrative that resonated with Springfield's small business supporters. The local girl who built a bakery from nothing and defended it against all odds became a story that people connected with. Sales surged by 30% in the month following the legal resolution. I received invitations to speak at business association meetings, mentor young entrepreneurs through the community college, and consult with other small business owners facing similar challenges. With the increased revenue, I was able to give Jaime and Tomas substantial raises and hire 2 additional staff members. I created an emergency fund large enough to cover 6 months of operating expenses, a security buffer I had always dreamed of but never managed to accumulate. The experience also transformed how I viewed my role as an employer, having felt the vulnerability of being undervalued and exploited. I became passionate about cultivating a workplace where everyone felt secure and appreciated. I implemented profit sharing, flexible scheduling, and professional development opportunities, the very things I had longed for during my early career. 6 months after the legal battle concluded, an unexpected opportunity arose. A prime retail location in downtown Springfield, a spot I could never have afforded in my early years. The property manager reached out to me directly, offering favorable lease terms because, as she explained, we want local success stories, not more faceless corporations. After conducting a careful financial analysis, I decided to take the plunge. The downtown location would become my flagship store, while the original bakery would be transformed into a production kitchen and training facility. I called it a leap of faith, but in truth, it was a calculated decision based on 5 years of proven resilience and growing demand. The expansion required additional financing, but this time, banks competed for my business. My loan officer, a young woman who reminded me of myself 6 years earlier, offered terms I could scarcely have imagined during my earlier struggles. "Your business history is impressive," she said, reviewing my application, "particularly your adaptability during multiple crises. That's what we look for, not just success, but proven resilience." The downtown location opened exactly 1 year after I had made the final payment on my original loan. The line of customers stretched around the block, reminiscent of my post-flood reopening, but this time there was no underlying financial anxiety. I could finally enjoy the moment. The new space boasted a glass-walled kitchen where customers could observe the art of pastry creation in real time, comfortable seating for those who wished to linger, and a dedicated consultation room for custom orders. I named it From Nothing, fully embracing the journey that had led me to this moment. At the grand opening, Madison interviewed me for her now nationally syndicated food blog. Looking back, she asked, "What would you tell other entrepreneurs facing similar challenges?" I considered her question carefully, reflecting on all the young business people who might be struggling as I once had. I finally replied, "Build something authentic, something that truly belongs to you. Success isn't just financial, it's about creating something meaningful that embodies your values and vision. And when challenges arise, and they always will, remember that resilience isn't about never falling, it's about always getting back up." As the interview wrapped up, I took a moment to look around at what I had created. Not just a bakery, but a community. Jamie had blossomed into an exceptional head baker, now training our newest team members with the same patience she had once shown me. Thomas managed front-of-house operations with warmth and efficiency. Regular customers greeted each other by name, forming friendships that extended beyond our walls. This, I realized, was the true family I had built, not one connected by blood, but by shared values and mutual respect. 3 years after the family confrontation, the Springfield Business Association named From Nothing Bakery the Business of the Year. Standing at the podium to accept the award, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from a run-down storefront with a second-hand oven to a thriving enterprise with 2 locations and 15 employees. Success is rarely a straight line, I told the audience. It's a journey marked by a series of challenges overcome, lessons learned, and relationships built. The most important ingredient isn't capital or connections, it's persistence. The following week, I launched a mentorship program specifically designed for young women entrepreneurs facing the barriers I had once encountered. The From Nothing Foundation offered microloans, business guidance, and moral support to those starting with limited resources but boundless determination. My first mentee was a 20-year-old single mother with a knack for web design and no formal business training. Watching her navigate early challenges with my support filled me with a sense of purpose that extended beyond my own success. When she secured her first major client, her joy became my joy as well. 5 years to the day after opening my first bakery, I found myself standing in my downtown kitchen before opening hours, savoring a rare moment of solitude. The scent of fresh bread wafted through the air, while morning light streamed through the windows, and the gentle hum of mixers created a soundtrack I had come to cherish. In that moment of reflection, I realized something profound. The bakery I had fought so hard to build and protect wasn't just a business. It was tangible proof that believing in yourself when no one else does isn't delusion. It's the first step toward creating something meaningful. The journey from nothing to something had transformed me in ways I never anticipated. The hardships hadn't broken me. They had forged me into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than I ever could have become without them. The betrayals taught me to value authentic relationships, while the struggles offered perspectives that no amount of easy success could provide. I had built my bakery from nothing, defended it against those who sought to claim it, and transformed it into something greater than I had ever imagined. Yet, the most significant transformation wasn't in the business. It was within me. Have you ever had to fight for something you created from scratch? Perhaps it wasn't a business, but something else that was truly yours. A relationship, a career, a creative project, or even your sense of self-worth? I would love to hear your stories of persistence and triumph in the comments below. If my journey has inspired you, please like this video, subscribe to hear more stories of resilience, and share it with someone who might need encouragement today. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful things are built from nothing.